welcome. For those of us meeting for the first time, my name is Stephanie Canada. Here on this channel we do all types of fun things: vintage, sewing, thrifting, all with heavy doses of sarcasm. Today's going to be a little bit different. While I normally discuss the hows and adventures through sewing, today we're just going to sit and chat a little about why we sew. Oh, my husband made that. That is bitter. Thanks for making the coffee, dear. I asked some folks over on Instagram using my stories, which I'm still not 100% sure I actually know what I'm doing with those, why they sew. And this was a few of the responses I got. Some did it because they wanted to challenge themselves. Others did it because they had a very hard time fitting their particular bodies, because clothes that are made in large factories are made to, quote, standard patterns. And we all know how standard bodies are. One of the folks that responded is a very dear friend of mine who's also a fellow Orlando YouTuber and vintage lover. Her name is Liz Von Villas. You can find her on Instagram and on YouTube. And she responds, "I sew because I love vintage fashion, and I'd rather make it myself than have to search high and low for pieces. Before I sewed my own clothes, I had a hard time finding the thing that fit me really well. So that's a huge plus too." Miss R.M. Tenorio writes, "The answer has evolved over the years. It started with I like to make new things and learning new skills. Sewing was one of them. Then I found it fun and relaxing. Then I wanted to challenge myself with fit and making vintage outfits I couldn't find anywhere." I enjoyed this one quite a lot. This is from Rachel Vintage Flower. "Because true vintage is too fragile for my lifestyle." I feel you, Rachel. 100%. Deanna's So Sweet replies, "I sew because I have bipolar depression. I have an obsession with buying clothes. It's nice to have a hobby and ideas that keep my mind off of things." Silva Whirl replies, "I enjoy learning techniques that aren't as commonly used nowadays. I also sew to help my anxiety levels." I did enjoy the answers that I got from everyone, and thank you all so much for submitting them. But one thing that I notice is that, for me personally, the why of sewing is so very personal that it's almost hard to speak into existence. For me, the why of sewing is a connection. A connection through the eras. But for me, most importantly, a connection to my mother. Ooh, well, that was unexpected. My mother sewed, I think, from the time that she could. She never really fit well into the clothes that her family could afford. They would get hand-me-downs, and then she learned how to sew and alter things, and then through her home economic courses, she learned how to make clothes for herself, which is really awesome because there's one dress I have that she might have made when she was 13 or so. Oh my goodness. One, she was tiny, and two, seeing these early creations from my mother are just a reminder that I'm on the right track and it's okay to not be perfect. But then my entire life growing up, my mother was the one that sewed clothes for me, and she would sew clothes for her mom because she couldn't find things that fit her, and my cousin and my aunt, and it wasn't like she clothed the world. It was more personal for her too. She always told me that she never wanted to take orders because then people would have these really high expectations that she was afraid she would never meet. So my mother, who was by far an amazing seamstress, never sold clothes. She would sell stuffed animals and pillows and decorations and all this other stuff, but she never sold clothes. She was always afraid that they wouldn't fit right or that someone would be unhappy, whereas she felt more comfortable in crafts because it's much easier to look at a craft and not be quite so nitpicky, is how she described it to me. Which I completely understand. Even for me and my daughter making our clothes, I still am like, all I do is stare at the imperfections. And it's hard for me to look past those flaws. But then when you show photos or when people see it in real life, they don't notice the fact that you haven't hemmed the dress or that you installed the zipper slightly crooked a little bit. They don't see any of that because what they see is this amazing creation that you the person, have made. And that connection, that instant where you connect with a real person over something that you've made, or you make for someone and they have a real connection with that garment. That's a why. That's a why you sew, for human connection. And that connection between person to person sometimes is hard to get nowadays because we have to deal with all these screens that are in between us. Or we have this ridiculous aspiring to be perfect, like the little models on the television or the models in the old vintage magazines. They still edited their photos. They still tweaked things. There were still people that were pinned into things. But all you see is what they wanted you to see. And so that level of aspiring to perfection is, I think, what harnesses a lot of us back into the, maybe I shouldn't sew. I can't do it as good as fill in the blank. So that real connection is a part of why I sew. Because it is really fun to hand my daughter a dress and watch her little eyes just light up. She doesn't care that there aren't buttons on it and that we have to safety pin her into it. She just sees this beautiful thing that for me, her mother, made for her. So there's that level of connection that I really think is part of the why. The other part of the why is the dirtier part of the why, for me at least. I look around and I see fast fashion everywhere. And I don't like it most of the time. It's baseline plastic that's going to sit in landfills for longer than you or I are going to be on this planet. It's going to be worn for a season or two before something tears, something gives out, and then people just give it away, throw it away. It doesn't have the longevity of a handmade garment that you really put your heart into. Not to mention all the other reasons why fast fashion is just pretty much terrible. You've got the waste it creates, the consumption that it takes just to make any of these pieces, and so many, many other reasons. I'll do a whole video on fast fashion if you really want it. I could go into a rant, but that is not for today. Another one of the reasons that you responded to me and told me that you sew at least vintage sewing is because you can't find the sizes that you are. And everybody is individual. Every human form is different. But as survival bias dictates, really only the smallest survive, or the pieces that were used the least, cherished the most, and tucked away in a closet and never really dealt with. Worn once, and then never again. Those larger sizes got passed down, handed over, put into rags, and then eventually worn into this threadbare thing that really is no good anymore. So for folks like me, and you maybe, you can't find your sizes in the clothing that you want. And that's what RM Tenorio hits on as well, is that she wanted to create pieces that she couldn't find, which I think is amazing. That ability to take these pieces of unbeknownst cloth and turn them into a wearable garment that you can love for years to come. That's a really big why. And while I know sewing isn't perfect, because we still do consume the cotton threads that it takes to put our stuff together. And while I do love a lot of the vintage threads and findings, it's not always practical to use that. Sometimes you do have to buy new, which isn't ideal. I do try and thrift most of my things because that's about as close to being green in sewing as you can do. Either taking an old garment and refashioning it, or going to the thrift store, buying, my favorite is old sheets. Old duvet covers, ripping them apart. That's my favorite because a lot of the times what those were made out of is old cottons. So you still have all this fabric that's out there. You just have to look a little bit beyond the Joann fabrics. And I say this and I can hear some of you on the other side going, that's fine for you, Stephanie, but I can't really sew, so why would I start? The reason you start is because you want to. I'm not saying everyone has to sew. It is a useful skill, but it is by and large not something that everyone can do. I am not here to be ableist and say everyone must sew, because it's not physically possible for everyone. But if you can and you want to learn, and the only thing that is holding you back is you, I invite you to try. Start with something small. You know, do you not like a throw pillow cover? Do you want to change it up? Do you want a mask but you don't know where to start? Start with something small and attainable. And honestly, watch as many videos as you can. Because for me, while I do love my vintage sewing books and using them as a reference when I get stuck, YouTube, this thing that you're on right here, is a fantastic resource for any and all things sewing. You've got all the way from no narration, just music, to step-by-step, here's how you do this thing. Go forth and look for someone that speaks your language. If it's me, cool. I'm working on more videos. If it's not me, I understand. I'm not for everyone, and that's fine. But I really hope that you can find that person. For me, it's a mixture of about watching 6 people. Between the super knowledgeable, gonna walk me through it step by step when I am just so frustrated with something that I want to chuck it across the room, to I'm gonna watch this friend, or who feels like a friend, sew this thing that I've never tried before. I don't intend on doing it anytime soon, but I enjoy the journey with them. And you'll pick up little tidbits along the way. So I just invite you to go forth on this platform, find people that speak to you, find your tribe of sewing friends, and sew. And enjoy it. Because that's really what it's about. Cheers, friends. I hope I've taken just a little bit of your time and inspired you to try something new. Now, this isn't my usual type of content, but if you enjoyed it, I'd really love it if you could click that like button, subscribe if you want to hang out, and come check out some of the things that I sew and some of my other endeavors. Turn on the bell. Maybe YouTube will actually tell you when something goes up. We all are dubious as to whether or not that actually works. And either way, I really hope I'll see you next time.